I'm Professor Flint, and I'm here at the Marine Discovery Centre, Henley Beach, with my good friend Karno Martin. Hello, Karno.
Hello, Professor Flint. How are you?
I'm very good. So, Karno, as you know, and my hat tends to give it away, and my accent, I come from Scotland, which is across the seas.
Yeah.
But I now live here in Adelaide, in what is Ghana land.
Yes.
Can you? So where are you from? What's your background? What's your ancestry background?
So my ancestry background is I come from two Aboriginal family groups on both my mother and father's side. So on my father's side, I am actually Karno, which are the traditional people that reside within the Adelaide area. However, my mother's side, I have ties to what we call the Narungga people, which are another group of Aboriginal people that live within South Australia, but out on the northern area near the Yorke Peninsula.
Okay, so over in the York, so your family comes from those two different places?
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, the reason that we're here at the Marine Discovery Centre is because there's this really cool area that we're in, and there's a whole lot of stories amongst all of the stuff that's here. And as a scientist, what's really important to me is science is a very specific process of learning and understanding and checking data and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important that we learn about culture and different ways of understanding. And that's what some of the stuff that you do here at the Marine Discovery Centre is about.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I guess in terms of the different ways of understanding and the two differences between modern day science and traditional, I guess what we could also call science, is that, travel back tens of thousands of years ago, a lot of the things that are recorded traditionally are based upon observations, which are very, very relevant to modern day science as well. It's about studying things and how certain things behave with others, but for us mainly within a natural environmental state. So how do things react?
What are those? One of my favourite words is phrases. It's the symbiotic relationships between things, isn't it? It's how things act, rather than science is very good at picking things apart. But what Aboriginal knowledge does, it's a way of looking at things together as a whole.
Yeah, pretty much. So collectively, what things are connected with each, and how many times can you go around that circle and find that there is more and more that is connected. Yeah, so it's a continuous stream of connectivity. Absolutely
fascinating. So what have we got? What's something here that you can tell us about? That's to help give us, I guess, a bit of an understanding.
So I guess one of the I guess if we talk about a lot of the tools and the way that they work, when you look at a lot of these implements, especially things like the boomerang, and we have just a couple up here as well. Probably one of the most well-known images that you will probably see when you hear the word boomerang is the shape of this. Now, just this shape alone, there is a lot of different things going on here through, again, the understanding of wind and how objects, when thrown or gliding through the wind, actually react. So there's a lot of what we call, I guess scientifically, aerodynamics going on with just this instrument.
Because it is, when you look at it, if you ever look at the shape of an aeroplane wing, the thing that causes the lift is the fact that underneath the wing, the air has less distance to travel than the top of the wing. And that's exactly what we see with boomerangs and exactly what allows them to fly. And I think what you said earlier was interesting about observation, and that this knowledge is gained through observation in the same way. You know, we who do science in the lab or out in the field, it's about observation, it's about measuring those observations. And the observations that you're talking about whether it's to do with traditional medicine, whether it's to do with traditional seasons, because where I come from, we have 4 seasons.
Yes.
Right? We just have summer, winter, autumn, and the other one, spring. Yes. So, but that wasn't the case here, was it?
No, so we have an additional 2 other seasons traditionally. Some of them are based upon weather, but then there are a few that are actually dependent on environmental movement and also animal movement. So what things are happening within your environment with certain creatures and areas and stuff like that. It might be, what time is the river flowing at its fullest, which will connect to things like, there might be the sea life or the aquatic life within the river might be more so due to that, and all of these things that are connected to it.
So it's in a way it's fascinating, isn't it? Because the seasons from my culture are very, it starts at this date, finishes at this date, and the dates, and they're a bit of a rough guide. We know things that happen in spring, and we know things, in winter it's cold, and in summer it's hot, and all that sort of stuff. But it seems to me that with what you're talking about, it's much more subtle and much more connected to, as you say, how things, like, is this the time of year that these particular plants start growing and these particular migration of these species starts happening and those sorts of things?
Yes. So at the moment, the current time that we are actually in is what we know has been recorded for many years now as winter. For us, our traditional word that we have for it is called kudlila, which pretty much means this is one of those seasons that is based upon weather, because kudlila basically translates to time of cold.
And it is. I'm from a place of coldness, but I can tell you, Adelaide is a place of cold. Yes.
Yeah. So we do have a lot that are based upon the weather, but then it's also the connection to animals, and sometimes it can be plants and fruits and things like that, which I guess, when plants and things are flourishing, that's might what we be what we know as spring, and so on and so forth. So there's all these connections.
So, okay, here at Marine Discovery Centre, obviously it's the Marine Discovery Centre, so part of the brief here is to learn about connections to the ocean and the sand. One of my favourite things about beaches is that they're that place where the land meets the ocean and it meets the sky.
Yeah. So
you've got this fascinating kind of relationship. So what do we know about, and let's say it's 40,000 years of history of Karno people here.
Yeah.
And we don't know the exact numbers, but what do we know about the importance of the ocean? What are some things you can tell us in that regard?
Oh, especially for the Adelaide region and the Karno people and any of the people that live on the coast, it was something that was definitely a large factor of their livelihood, because you've got your food sources and all that kind of stuff. There's massive amounts, or maybe once was a lot of fish out in the ocean, and so there was always a lush source of food that people could go to and fish. And there are many different ways that the people would actually fish. One of the probably first ones that you would think of is spear fishing, with a wooden spear that had been made and might have kind of like a stone tip on it, or perhaps quartz as well. However, this is kind of where you move into a bit of observational scientific knowledge as well, because one of the things that the Indigenous people from Australia used to do on the coastlines is, when they actually went out fishing, they already had an understanding through seeing how the environment reacts in terms of the tides and all that kind of stuff. So we use the knowledge of the time of day and the tidal movements of the ocean to our advantage when it did come to fishing. So we would actually create sort of like, I guess, you could call it a trap, where we would set a formation of rocks into kind of like a crescent or a curve, and leave one opening. So at the time of a high tide, when it's coming in, the water rushes in, and then the fish actually swim within that gap that you've created. And then at the time that the low tide is heading out, you can actually just hop
And
a
you just
trap.
walk in and you just, hello fishes, that's dinner sorted. And it's fascinating because that comes from that stuff that you talked about at the beginning, and we've gone back to a couple of times, of the importance of the observation of patterns, of behaviours, of animals, of plants, of seasons, and the importance of that over, ultimately, and the knowledge obtained from that over thousands of years.
Yeah. So again, and this, like you've mentioned, is a unknown number as to how much knowledge tracks back from, 10, 20, 40, 50,000 years, possibly more. And you can tell that there is a lot that has been created and used within that time.
And we know that the amazing thing, that there's a lot of talk after, as they should have been, and should have been beforehand, after the horrible bushfire season that we had, of, maybe it would be a good idea if we listened and had a word with the folk that have been here for a very long time, who were able to manage the fire much better than we're doing at the moment. And in the same way, when we think about the oceans and the seas and the fish, there are times when we are looking at huge declines in numbers.
Yeah.
Maybe if we spent more time talking with, whether here it's Karno people or wherever we are around Australia on the coast, if we spoke to the local people, what can we learn? And then what are the things that people like me in lab coats can bring to the conversation as well? What are the things that we can share? And I think that's really important.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because once you think about it, there's within that history. Of course, there are many different factors many bits of knowledge that people can use. Going back to the whole bushfire thing and the controlling of those events, was we did what we call a burn-off. Where throughout the summertime, where the grass is drying up and stuff like that, we would actually create a controlled bushfire to actually try and prevent a natural bushfire occurring. To
prevent the catastrophic fires,
yes,
where you have the massive load because it hasn't been cleared, whether it's through, back in the olden days, there may have been megafauna and things like we see in places like Africa,
yeah,
that were feasting on that and keeping that down. But without megafauna, and maybe even still with them, you've got that, because we have eucalypts. And it's one of the great things. Every time I go away and come back to Australia, one of the great things is that smell of eucalypts and stuff. Okay. Time to have a look at a couple more things. So you showed us the boomerang and talked about that.
Yeah.
If there was one more thing that's in front of us that you could show us here on the sand, what would it be?
Okay, so one of the things with a lot of the tools that we created as well was we tried to create them in ways where it would have more than just one use. And one of the things that I reckon I could probably pull down from here is this. So this is what we call a boomerang. Now, some people are probably familiar with this item, but not the traditional style of one. Because I see a lot these days, whenever I go to a dog park, you see people with those curved plastic tennis ball throwers.
Of course.
This essentially acts like one of those, where it gives you more leverage and an extra extension to your arm. And the way that we use this is for when we go out hunting.
So sure,
And it's used for for our spears. So just here where we have kind of like a little barb, I guess you could call it, that sticks out. On the very top of our spear, we would have kind of an indent where that would sit into. And then we hold it just in between our finger, line up what we're aiming for, and then basically just throw and release. Now, giving an extra extension to your arm, you're able to launch it a lot further. You can almost think of it like a slingshot, if you will. And one of the really cool things about, this, I guess, sustainability by creating multiple purposes is this is almost like a multi-tool. One of the things that you can do with it, obviously you can hunt by using your spears, but you can also create fires through friction. So you can create a friction fire by getting two pieces of wood together and just simply rubbing like so. And usually, now if you see on the bottom here, the handle that is created there is actually a mixture of resin from a spinifex grass. So a spinifex grass, and this is kind of the connection to the ocean back again, is a grass that you usually see down the coastlines here that help retain the sand dunes, and that it creates a resin. And that's what we've used. We've melted it down to create that handle. Now usually just in the end here you could actually attach a sharpened piece of quartz that you've chipped away at to create very thin, because for those of you that may have tested quartz before, once it's broken into a thin point, it is basically like a broken piece of glass, and so you could also use that as a cutting tool.
Yep.
So there's three different things that you can do with just this item. Essentially, you're hunting, you're cooking, and you're cutting.
You can anything like you could put my dinner.
Yeah,
Put my
exactly.
dinner in there. Okay, that is fantastic. And again, I think it's that knowledge of that sophistication of knowledge of multi-use of things.
Yeah.
And the physics is perfect, isn't it? The understanding of, you might not be writing down a mathematical equation, but you know exactly how it's going to work. Now, I would be pretty bad at this, at least to begin with, so I think I need a bit of practice. Look, Karno, we could talk probably for the next 5 years.
Most definitely.
Because there is so much to talk about, and maybe we'll have another chat another day and talk about some other things.
Yeah.
But what I want to finish with is that little device behind you.
Yes.
Often referred to as a didgeridoo, and often, of course, associated as a sound of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
A unique Australian sound, in the same way that the smell of eucalyptus is. If you were to...
like the bagpipes are.
The bagpipes in Scotland, well, there's a similarity, which is why I love the didge. But that's not its actual name, is it?
No, so if you think about how old some of these items are, again, the didgeridoo dates back quite a far way. And the instrument doesn't necessarily come from the Adelaide region of Australia or the South Australian area. Where it was originally created was actually in the Northern Territory, which we know to be the top of Australia. It's in the Northern Territory, it's quite a dry area as well. It's known as a desert kind of environment. And there's many different Aboriginal tribes or groups that live throughout the entirety of Australia. There's supposed to be, if I give a round off kind of rough number, roughly about 500 different groups. And the true makers of this instrument are what we call the Yolngu people, who resided within northeast Arnhem Land area. So again, up in the top of Australia. And their traditional language name for this instrument, which again is a wind instrument, is the Yellaka.
Yellaka.
Yeah.
Got that? Yellaka. Not didgeridoo, but Yellaka.
Yeah, but didgeridoo is now I guess what is the more commonly known name for this instrument. One of the really cool things that I like to do with this instrument is kind of deconstruct the way that it works by, again, explaining like all the different things that you do. But before I get into that, there's a lot of, when you talk about culture and respect between groups of people, we always do like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of land, stories, and items and things like that. So out of respect for the Yolngu people, before I get into it, one of the things that we do is in Yolngu Mata, which means Yolngu tongue, so it's the traditional owner's language. I just like to start by saying Yolngu Yiriki Mai Makyo, which is pretty much just me paying those respects to the traditional owners of this instrument.
It's such a... over the last, I think, 20 years, it's become a thing that we're getting better at here in Australia of being able to do that as a broader society, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Which is why one of the things I like to do when we start is to say, well, I come from Scotland, that's where my ancestors lived.
Yeah.
But now I'm here in Australia on Ghana land. In the same way that you talked about your ancestors from here and over on Yorks, but then your reference to where this comes from.
Yeah.
And the stories of this. And it's about acknowledging and better knowing history, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And stories.
One of the really interesting things about this instrument as well is actually the way that it is traditionally made. And this again is something that people learn over many, many years. Some Aboriginal people might devote their entire life to perfecting and mastering how to actually make a didgeridoo traditionally. And one of the first observations when you are looking to make one of these is, of course, we all know that they're made out of wood, and from trees is where we get wood, but that's not the first thing that the masters of making these instruments would look for. The first thing that they look at is not the sky, it's not level ground, it's actually to the floor. So they would actually look for, I guess, trails or mounds of what we know to be termites. Termites being an insect that like to eat wood. And so you would try and find one that has, you would look for termite mounds or tracks of termites, follow it to trees and give it a little tap to see if it does sound like it is hollowed out enough, and break it down, take it home. One of the things that you do is create a fire and wait for those coals to settle, and then just kind of sit those coals on the center of it, and it slowly starts to sink through. And one of the really interesting things as well, and this is again from a lot of knowledge, is the heat that travels through actually also creates tension with the wood, and it strengthens it at the same time. So there's all these different things happening.
So the termites start the thing,
Yeah.
and then you take over with the charcoal or the burning stuff and extend that down.
Yeah. So to the way that you learn to play it is first creating a vibration. So this is an instrument that is played through vibration, and those vibrations echo and amplify when it reaches the end. And the way that we do that is basically by, I guess, in modern terms, blowing a raspberry.
It's true. It is. I know, because I've had a go. I was bought a Yellaka, or given a gift of a Yellaka a few years ago, and I'm not very good at it. I can do the raspberry bit, but it's the breathing as well.
Yeah, so there's three main things that we kind of learn when playing it. The first thing is, again, just creating a vibration, and that is creating a vibration with your lips, which basically looks like this.
It is a raspberry, yes.
Yeah, and that again just echoes and amplifies as it reaches the end and travels through. The next thing is the breathing. So this is just kind of deconstructing how this works. Now, it's said that you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth while you're playing. And basically how that works is by creating a small pocket of air in your mouth, pushing that out, and then using that kind of like a pause to then breathe in.
So you breathe. So you've got like this pouch of air in here. You're expelling that, and then while that's expelling, you're going, "Oh, I'll breathe some more in to fill that up again."
Yeah, which again just looks like this. So that's how you do it. And then one of the last things that we learn to do after you've learned to play, after you've learned all of those technical things, is vocalizing with the instrument. So we use our voice to actually create a lot of different sounds. If it's the sound of a kookaburra, everyone knows, if you're in Australia, what a kookaburra sounds like. A kookaburra is basically a bird that sounds like it laughs. Or if it's the sound of a dingo, which sounds like a howl. Or trying to replicate the bouncing of a kangaroo and all those different things.
So you do all that?
Yeah, just doing all of those things through the instrument. For instance, if you have a kookaburra sound,
so you do that at the same time
as doing the
raspberry and the breathing. So all of those things all at once.
Yeah, which would look like this.
And then it's amplified with that. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to say cheerio.
Okay.
But, and I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, part of who you are, with all of us here.
Anytime, Professor.
If you ever want to come to the Marine Discovery Centre, if you're in Adelaide, we'll include some information on how you can connect to them. They've got some fantastic things. So I think it would just be lovely for us, for you to just kind of play us out with, and maybe make some of those sounds.
Yeah.
As you're listening, see if you can work out what animal or what kind of sound Karno is making. And we hope to talk to you again some other time. Thank you so much.
No worries. All right, shall I?
I think yes.
Wow.